Eyes Wide Shut is often described as Stanley Kubrick's most mysterious film. A dream, a puzzle, an erotic thriller that refuses to explain itself. But for me, Eyes Wide Shut has actually always felt surprisingly human. Beneath all of Kubrick's ambiguity is a painfully honest story about two people whose marriage is suddenly shaken by something that never actually happened. There are no affairs, no betrayal. Instead, Kubrick explores something perhaps even more uncomfortable, the power that fantasy has over us, and how the things we imagine can sometimes wound us just as deep as the reality itself. More than anything, I think Eyes Wide Shut is about the fragility of the male ego, and the dangerous expectations we place upon both men and women. It asks us what happens when communication breaks down, when insecurity is left to grow in silence, when fantasy slowly begins replacing reality. Beneath the masks, beneath the rituals, and beneath Kubrick's hypnotic direction lies a story that many couples will recognise even if they'd never admit it. The remarkable thing about Bill, played by Tom Cruise, is that his life completely falls apart because of a conversation. His wife Alice, played by Nicole Kidman, doesn't cheat on him. She simply admits, when under the influence, that one day she saw another man and fantasized about him. But to Bill, that revelation is almost as devastating as if it had actually happened. It's one of the film's most uncomfortable moments because Bill genuinely cannot comprehend it. He insists that it's different, believing women simply aren't driven by those kinds of fantasies. From that moment onwards, Kubrick repeatedly shows us Alice with the naval officer that she imagined, not because it happened, but because Bill cannot stop creating it. Fantasy becomes reality inside his own mind. He ends up walking the streets like a ghost, unable to escape the image that follows him everywhere. What I love about Kubrick's approach is that he never turns Bill into a villain. It would have been very easy to make him simply unlikable. His views are clearly rooted in outdated ideas about masculinity and gender, and instead of returning home and just telling his wife, "This hurt me, let's talk about it," he does what generations of men have often been taught to do. He bottles it up, he carries it alone, and because he can't express what's happening inside him, he starts looking for another way to get rid of it. He convinces himself that sleeping with someone else will somehow restore the balance, almost as though revenge will erase his humiliation. But the more fascinating thing is that Bill never actually truly wants to cheat. His scenes with the young prostitute Domino are incredibly revealing. Rather than treating her as an object, Bill is gentle, he's respectful. Their interaction is surprisingly warm, and when nothing ultimately happens between them, he still pays her before leaving. And later, when he discovers she has HIV, his reaction isn't relief that he escaped danger, it's genuine concern. Bill isn't chasing sex, he's chasing relief. He's trying to just escape these feelings that he doesn't understand. And yet every path he chooses only pulls him further away from the one place he actually needs to be, home. Every street he walks down, every person he meets, every opportunity that presents itself is now filtered through that single obsession. It's almost as though Bill has entered a trance. He's constantly moving throughout the film, wandering the streets of New York late at night, yet he never really seems to be going anywhere. Kubrick's camera is always following him, sometimes from behind, sometimes in front. The camera's almost attached to Tom Cruise as if it refuses to leave his side. The movement is gentle, patient, and incredibly intimate. Rather than rushing us through the story, Kubrick gives Bill the space to think, to hesitate, to wrestle with emotions that he can't put into words. And that's one of the things I find so compelling about Tom Cruise's performance. It's less about what Bill does than how he reacts. We're used to Tom Cruise playing men who always seem to have the answer, characters driven by confidence and certainty. But Bill spends almost the entire film completely lost, and Cruise embraces that vulnerability in a way we don't often see from him. So much of the performance exists in silence, with lingering close-ups when we're simply watching Bill trying to understand what he's feeling. And if Tom Cruise spends the film reacting, then Nicole Kidman changes the entire course of it with one extraordinary scene. And don't get me wrong, it's worth acknowledging here that while Alice had a fantasy and didn't act on it, her honesty is incredibly painful. She's harsh, she's brutal with her confession to Bill. She doesn't simply admit to finding another man attractive. She tells Bill that her fantasy was to abandon him and the life they built for someone she'd never even spoken to. It seems in that moment she intends to hurt him, or perhaps it's because she's under the influence, I don't know, but she's devastating in her delivery, and it's such an unforgettable moment.
I was ready to give up everything. You, Helena, everything. And yet it was weird because at the same time, you were dearer to me than ever.
Kubrick never makes it entirely clear whether Alice realises just how deeply her words will wound him. They're experiencing the same conversation in completely different ways, and I think Alice later in the film does understand the way she delivered this completely and utterly messed Bill's head up. And that's why I don't think Bill's pain should ever be dismissed. While he's going down the wrong route, anyone would struggle after hearing the person they love describe a fantasy with that level of intensity. His heartbreak is real. The tragedy isn't that he's hurt, it's what he chooses to do with that hurt. You understand why he's devastated, but the answer isn't to run away from it. The answer is to confront Alice and see if they can work through this. Because like Bill, Alice is flawed. The difference is that Bill allows those flaws to take control of him. Ironically, the man who was so horrified by the idea of his wife having sexual fantasies slowly becomes the very person he insisted he wasn't. He begins actively searching for sex, not because it's who he is, but because he feels compelled to become the man he suddenly believes Alice sees him as. And meanwhile, Alice never actually betrays him. She had opportunities earlier in the film. She admits to fantasies, but that's where it ends. While Bill spends the night wandering through temptation, chasing something he doesn't even understand, but Alice remains at home with their daughter. And I think Kubrick deliberately builds that contrast because it reveals the tragedy at the heart of Bill's journey. The greatest threat to Bill's marriage isn't another man, it's his own imagination. Of course, Stanley Kubrick's direction is incredible. For a film that's often described as a thriller, very little happens in the conventional sense. Kubrick builds tension through observation. The camera glides through everything, always remaining close enough to Bill so that we feel trapped inside his perspective. Kubrick trusts that simply watching a man think can be compelling. Like so many of Kubrick's films, Eyes Wide Shut exists in a strange dreamlike state. Dreams become one of the film's central themes too. Alice's fantasy is almost dreamlike in the way Bill continually visualizes it. And then later Alice herself awakens from a disturbing dream that leaves both of them emotionally exposed. Fantasy and reality constantly blur together until neither Bill nor the audience can entirely separate one from the other. That dreamlike quality reaches its most disturbing point when Bill enters the masked ritual. For me, this sequence isn't simply there to shock us. I don't think Kubrick was primarily interested in secret societies or conspiracy. Instead, the ritual feels like the natural destination of Bill's state of mind. Throughout the film, he's been allowing fantasy, revenge, and sexual obsession to consume him, and eventually he stumbles into a world built entirely upon those ideas. A world where sex has become completely detached from love, where intimacy has disappeared, where people wear masks because genuine human connection no longer exists. Kubrick transforms what should be an act of closeness into something deeply unsettling. Sharp piano notes, the haunting chanting, the deep red interiors and the expressionless masks create an atmosphere that feels almost like horror. This isn't a celebration of sexuality, it's sexuality emptied of humanity. And I love how Kubrick communicates this to us through his use of colour. Whenever Bill is safe, whenever he's at home or somewhere grounded in reality, blue light often surrounds him. It creates a feeling of calm, homeliness, where he should be, where the difficult conversations need to happen. But the further he drifts into obsession, the more red begins to dominate. Red becomes temptation, pressure, fantasy, pain he's carrying. And by the time Bill reaches that ritual, he's entered a world consumed entirely by that colour. The film even reinforces this idea outside of the ritual itself. The costume shop reveals a father prostituting his own daughter, and then Domino, one of the kindest people Bill encounters, later discovers she has HIV. Again and again, Kubrick shows sex separated from love, intimacy and honesty. He shows us sex gone wrong, dangerous or exploitative. And after everything he's experienced, after every temptation, every nightmare, Bill finally does the one thing he should have done from the very beginning. He goes home. He breaks down and he tells Alice everything. For me, that's one of the most beautiful moments in Kubrick's entire filmography, because Bill finally stops searching for answers everywhere except inside his own marriage. The final conversation between Bill and Alice isn't presented as some perfect Hollywood ending where every wound instantly disappears. If anything, it acknowledges the idea that rebuilding trust is difficult. Relationships aren't healed by one conversation, but there is hope. The two of them finally seem ready to do the hard work together. And I think that's ultimately what Eyes Wide Shut is about. Not sex, not conspiracies, not secret societies. It's about two people learning that love isn't protected by pretending difficult thoughts don't exist. It's protected by having the courage to speak about them before fantasy takes control. And beneath all of Kubrick's mystery lies something remarkably simple: a husband, a wife, and the painful but ultimately necessary act of telling the truth.